Can you hear me, sir?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Hey, everybody, we'll just wait a couple more minutes. All right. Okay, people are still filtering in here. $12:05 seems about appropriate. Okay, hello, thank you for coming today. The University of Washington acknowledges the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, Duwamish, and Muckleshoot nations. My name is Flint Jameson, and this acknowledgement for me personally ought to be a statement. I believe it should be a statement that this land still belongs to the indigenous peoples who had it stolen from them by our ancestral settlers. It's still theirs. And even though the structures that bind our society have pushed, sequestered, and marginalized indigenous people elsewhere, we are occupants of this stolen land. Please join me next week at the same time and place when Soil Thornton will give a talk. Moreover, today, after our lecture here, the infamous Maria Nordman will be joining us in the classroom. We'll be sure to share a link to that in the chat if anybody wants to come and see that performance. What will happen? Okay, so as is the case with these lectures, there'll be time for questions and answers after Sung finishes. Feel free to write those questions in the chat and or send them to me or one of the other co-hosts directly. Also, I'm guilty of sending the wrong message to the wrong person in Zoom chat. So just a little Zoom hygiene reminder. Remember that there's a drop-down menu in the chat to address to whom you want to be sending your message. As always, I'd like to thank the School of Art, History, and Design at the University of Washington for making this happen. I'd also like to thank our collaborating partner, the Henry Gallery. Finally, the Dale and Leslie Chihuly Foundation support this series and make it possible. Okay, so today, please join me in welcoming Sung Tieu. Sung is joining us all the way from Berlin. I suspect you've done your own research and you know about her work prior to arriving here. So I'll let her and what she presents do the rest of the introduction. Thank you for agreeing to come, Sung. And yeah, take it away.
Thank you. Well, I didn't go very far, but thank you, Flint, for inviting me to this lecture and the discussion with you all. For today's talk, I will predominantly focus my presentation on my most recent solo exhibition, at Emmeline Gallery in London, titled What is Your Ex? And I think maybe I'm just going to share my screen so you can. Okay. And after that, I'll dive more generally into my research about institutionalized superstition and the exploitation, especially focusing on tools PSYOPs has deployed during the Vietnamese-American War for their psychological warfare machine and the resulting sonic warfare tactics they have weaponized. If there's some time left at the end of this talk, I would like to show you how this research has found its way into exhibitions such as remote viewing at Nha Sang Collective in Hanoi and in-code print at Nottingham Contemporary in the UK. Quoting from a recent review by Alex Kisho for Art Review, visitors to What is Your Ex enter a false room nested inside the bare gallery where the floor is flushly carpeted, fluorescent lights blinding white. At either side, 8 prison doors bolted unmovably onto interior walls lead the eye in onwards towards the room's gleaming center. A great steel wheel mounted on the room's far face, and according to the exhibition notes, weighing over half a ton, encloses a mirror laser engraved with Tieu's astrological birth chart. A surrounding relief of interlocking gears mimics a waltz locking mechanism, end quote. Accompanying the show was a press text consisting entirely of footnotes with the following information. 1. The stainless steel mirror sheets are grade 304, 1.4301. Each sheet weighs 23.75 kilograms per square meter. 2. Natal chart 12 July 1987, Sunday, 6:40 a.m. till 7 a.m., Hai Duong, Vietnam. 2. 9:46 a.m. to 10 a.m., Hai Duong, Vietnam, on the 15th of August, 2020. The 12th house in astrology, which encloses most of the planets in Tieu's birth chart, represents the realm of collective unconscious. It is the house of the inner soul, secrets, creativity, and spirituality. It also represents the house of entrapment, isolation, and mental illness. 3. The scenarios described on the door windows explore the psyche based on 3 dichotomies after C.G. Jung: introversion versus extroversion, thinking versus feeling, sensation versus intuition. 4. The font used in the exhibition is Goldman Songs, a typeface Goldman & Sachs released in June 2020. As their license outlines, the font is free to use for any purpose as long as the user does not utilize it to criticize the company Goldman Sachs. What is Your Ex? In many ways symbolizes a departure from my previous works. Even though there are thematic overlaps with previous subjects, the way I conceived the exhibition feels a lot more direct, less research heavy, with greater emphasis on affect than other shows I've conceived. Produced during the early months of 2020, during a time filled with uncertainty and a pandemic sweeping through the world, I felt very unsure about the nature and meaning of art and exhibition making. In many ways, I felt that I had nothing to say about the current moment. Left with not really knowing what to do, I decided to speak to an astrologer about my situation. In times of great uncertainty, I myself felt dependent on receiving external advice. Adorno, in his essay, Stars Down to Earth, first published in 1975, argues that astrology cannot be simply interpreted as an expression of dependence, but must also be considered as an ideology for dependence, as an attempt to strengthen and somehow justify painful conditions, which seems to be more tolerable if an affirmative attitude is taken towards them. Under such conditions, the astrological voice, offers an authoritative viewpoint, exempt from the individual's own critical control, that can be used to aid and comfort irrational conditions. To be rational in this case means to not question irrational forces, but instead to make use of them for one's best own interest. This form of astrological reasoning, as Adorno argues, utilizes a form of pseudo-rationality by referring to astronomy and the constellation of the stars for justification. By employing this pseudo-rationality, it reveals similar traits to forms of reasoning that play a crucial role in totalitarian social movements by communicating a calculative message while adapting to realistic needs. Adorno argues that astrology, in their irrationality, shows similarities to totalitarian states, which equally claim to have a key for everything, know all the answers, reduce the complex to the simple, and mechanical interference, doing away with everything that is strange, unknown, and at the same time, they explain nothing. Within this pseudo-rationality, okay, this other footnote, sorry. Within astrology, the pseudo-rationality has been reduced to a purely formal characteristic, an abstract authority without an author, sort of depersonalized, unapproachable, and anonymous, but equipped with the ability to reveal the general state of mind of a particular time. This reflects the type of irrationality in which the total order of our lives is presenting itself to most individuals during this pandemic. Who wants to survive under present conditions has to accept the absurdity of life and threats to life, like the verdicts of the stars. In this respect, astrology is in line with a wider contemporary trend. The feeling that we live in a world where most people's fate is independent from their will, their interest, and power. Astrology, in many ways, takes care of the sense of doom and overall uncontrollable threat by translating this mood into a pseudo-rational form, thus somehow localizing free-floating anxieties to transform them into definitive symbolism, but also gives some vague, diffuse comfort by making the senseless appear as though it had some hidden and grandiose meaning, while at the same time corroborating that this sense cannot be fully grasped in the realm of the human. The combination of the realistic and the irrational in astrology may ultimately be accounted for by the fact that it represents a threat and a remedy at the same time. I agree with Adorno when he argues that the cult of God has been replaced by the cult of facts. Just as the fatal entities of astrology, the stars, are themselves viewed as facts. Much like God, the columnist of astrological texts remains unknown, with no name or mention. Furthermore, stereotypical horoscopes promote a sense of compliance, which prevents a change of conditions. It can be easily seen how well this suits the overall purpose of the prevailing ideology of today's cultural industry, the reproduction of the status quo within the minds of the people. Equally, it can be seen as a tool for deception while reinforcing social norms. But for astrology to be in fact impactful, it interweaves rational with irrational elements by combining notedly blind acceptance of superior powers with rational messages, which more or less address practical everyday problems, for which they pretend to offer a helpful answer. The forecasts claim to be derived from astronomic facts. Their insights try to satisfy the longings of people who are convinced that others, or some unknown force, ought to know more about or know better than themselves what they should do. It is precisely this mundane and not so serious quality of astrological readings which particularly invites social and psychological interpretations. Unlike other horoscopes, the way I conceived my writing puts greater emphasis. I'm just going to scroll through this. I'm going to come back. Sorry, I just want to show you something else quickly. Voila. Unlike other horoscopes, the way I conceived my writing puts greater emphasis on deep psychological states and their descriptions, while at the same time attempting to find rather superficial solutions to these issues, which again are in line with other horoscopes and their overall limited power. Much of my writing was derived from the consultation sessions I had with my astrologer. When I consulted Zoe Mercury, which of course is not her real name, which I found out when I made a bank transfer to her accounts, I came with a quite specific question. I asked her, which alternative lives could I have lived if I didn't become a European-based artist? If instead I stayed my entire life in Haizhou, my hometown in Vietnam, and not migrated to Germany? The interpretation she concluded was based on my natal birth chart that you see at the center of the sculpture. Okay, we're just going to go back quickly. As the footnotes I have already outlined, the most driving force of my star constellation is the 12th house in astrology, which represents the house of inner feelings, the soul. It is the house of secrets, creativity, and spirituality. She said to me that potentially I would have internalized my needs for creative and spiritual expression if I stayed in Vietnam and if I didn't become an artist, which could have resulted in feelings of social entrapment, isolation, and ultimately could have caused mental illnesses. She also mentioned that probably I would have worked in finance if I stayed in Asia. I would have likely opened my own little business or would have managed other people's finance, my sort of own version of Goldman & Sachs. Equally, Zoe Mercury mentioned that I would have left Vietnam sooner or later because my Mars energy, the red line is my Mars energy, runs through Vietnam. It is the energy of passion, but also of aggression and violence. At the same time, she taught me that my Jupiter energy goes to the UK. I think I have a zoom in here. Yeah. It is the energy of curiosity and learning. And back in September 2020, I actually reconsidered moving back to London based on her astrological reading, but then ultimately stayed for a few weeks and decided to go back to Berlin. Many other things she has mentioned, which didn't ring true to me, I have already forgotten. Yet the overall insights from these conversations, as well as the investigations into horoscope columns heavily influenced by Adorno and his analysis of the Los Angeles Times astrology column, resulted in this exhibition. The effectiveness of my writing, and more generally horoscopes as a stylistic form at large, can be measured by the following factors, I would argue. Their ability to reveal the mental states of the reader, their adjustment to the reader's needs, wants, wishes, and demands, their ability to provide handy solutions and occupy a sort of twilight zone between reason and subconscious urges, which I find especially interesting in relation to psychoanalytic concepts, and how well the hidden meaning within the writing is communicated in regards to social norms and taboos. The ability to describe stereotypical assumptions while addressing a diverse range of audience. A sort of makeshift pseudo-individualization has to be created. While my writing tries to deploy all these methods listed, there are aspects that distinguish my text from regular horoscopes. My writing attempts to shatter psychological defenses by revealing them to the audience instead of masking them. At the same time, they cater to a narcissism and point towards extraordinary qualities of each personality trait and the reader. Vanity is therefore nourished while acknowledging powerful instinctual traits. Within the scenarios outlined, uh, I am addressing the audience from an unspecified view and generally rely on reoccurring problems of contemporary life while addressing psychological states of frustration, depression, anxiety, and ego struggle. Underlying all text, in the same manner as horoscopes, is a sense of threat that needs to be maintained. Because only if some sense of mild, continuous terror is expressed, the audience will seek advice. Threat and relief are therefore intertwined in a way that can be spotted in various mental states. For example, in my description within the work breakdown scenario. A codependency is thereby created. While regular horoscopes are careful to include potential narcissistic defenses on the side of the reader, which help compensate for the feelings of weakness, my writing rather tries to emphasize them. The neurotic traits of the person are exposed and revealed. In regular horoscopes, these traits are carefully accounted for, and oftentimes a soothing tone is deployed to reassure the reader that everything will be fine. Within my writing, I try to veer away from that everything will be fine model, and instead, I try to craft out more catastrophic scenarios while remaining a sense of constraint to not lose the readership due to too much discomfort. While these predictions remain unrealistic and imaginary, the advice given oftentimes can still be reconciled with the reader's life situation. Also, due to the fact that people who are gravitating towards horoscopes are willing to make these predictions fit their own life. Another issue I was greatly interested in when writing my text while analyzing other horoscopes is, on the one hand, their connection to the administration of social issues and their cause and effect relations, ranging mostly from financial needs, the acquiring of money and property, or a pay rise, or the accumulation of other financial resources through one's own business. Other issues that are equally addressed are love and family affairs, while at the same time recreating a given social order with respect to given hierarchies, such as your boss or a higher, more knowledgeable professional than yourself. And on the other hand, I was also interested in the administration and the cataloging of people and their personality traits. Horoscopes are inherently individualistic, and they rely on individualization to be effective. But at the same time, they are never radical. Instead, a sense of obedience is promoted. Within each horoscope, there are set patterns how this is done. At the same time, mechanisms of control and conservative views are set in place, which by necessity reduce the range of self-expression to a minimum. Furthermore, the writing, just to change the writing for a bit, I'm just going. Furthermore, the writing deploys an authoritarian tone by necessity to be effective, as any form of advice needs to conjure some power on some degree. The implicit irrationality of these writings serve a highly significant function in dealing with the anxieties and difficulties of those it addresses. Notions of luck are therefore implemented to comfort the addressee and in order to contemplate the irrational. The structural condition of the horoscope is that everything is connected to everything else. The writing itself is reliant on cultural conditioning. A collective authority is implemented by the invocation of friends and family relations. In a second stage, My writing has been influenced by Jungian's personality types, as mentioned in the footnotes. And these functions later on have also greatly influenced personalities tests, such as Myers-Briggs type indicator from the 1940s. Myers-Briggs type indicator is an introspective self-report questionnaire indicating differing psychological preferences in how people perceive the world and make decisions. Myers-Briggs tests have become hugely popular as a human resource tool for hiring certain personalities for certain job positions, and oftentimes people indicate their personality type on their resume, but also on other platforms such as Tinder, so to tell more about themselves to their potential dates and love affairs. This link to the corporate world is emphasized within the exhibition by the use of the font Goldman & Sachs. A font developed to look clean and modern, designed for dense data-rich environments. Furthermore, this corporate world is echoed through the design of the quasi-bank vault, cut from 3mm thick stainless steel plates, layered on top of each other, with interlocking gears screwed fixed to the wall. At the center of the sculpture, a black silkscreen on stainless steel mirror shows my natal birth chart, like I mentioned. The audience, this is just another slide about that you're not allowed to criticize Goldman & Sachs. I just wanted to include that without saying much else. So yeah, the audience finds themselves inside the vault, but outside of other rooms the individual doors might lead to. The light utilizes the neon strips of Emmeline's gallery while channeling them through two light strips covered by milky perspex. Left and right along the long sides of the wall, 4 quasi-doors, again cut from stainless steel, are placed. The doors each contain a silkscreen text on a mirror steel plate titled as scenarios, such as ego scenario, green scenario, breakdown scenario, or pleasure scenario, etc., etc. The voice of my writing, on the one hand, assimilates the voice of an astrologer, cum psychologist, and on the other hand, it tries to assimilate itself to an internal voice each person might have, a sort of omnipresent voice, indistinguishable from oneself and one's identity. I was interested in horoscopes and their psychology as a social drug, and how the popularity of such writing has dramatically increased in the last few years. Just a final note to the door design themselves. They allude to carceral doors, but equally they try and allude to office doors or medical doors. For example, in German administration offices, especially in the former GDR, one could find such doors in offices that would have a window to look through for employees to be able to see and control who's working and what is happening inside each office. All works within the show are trompe-l'oeil. They create sort of an optical illusion that deceives the eye by using realistic imagery. But yeah, they confuse the viewer by deception, because essentially they are not functioning doors. They are just metal sheets screwed onto the wall. And then a final note about the title. What is your X? X in the title refers to the absolute value of an unknown number. I wanted the title to be a question, because hopefully the viewer somehow leaves the exhibition with some answers or some reflections on what the absolute value could mean to themselves. Now I just want to show you the outside. So we built a specific sized room for the doors and the quasi-bank vault. And now I think I'm just gonna talk more generally about my research related to institutionalized superstition. I became invested in this subject around 4 years ago when I found a psychological operation titled Ghost Tip Number 10. And this image became hugely relevant for my work. It's a snapshot of an American soldier during the Vietnamese-American War. But it's also an image that is layered with elements of fiction, construction, reconstruction of histories, its manipulation, and its exploitation of deep-seated spiritual beliefs. The image is from the end of the 1960s, and we see a soldier standing alone in the Vietnamese forest with what looks like a backpack with 6 single speakers attached to it. The sound he's broadcasting through the speakers is a sound recording developed by PSYOPs, the Psychological Operations of the US Army, which has its 6th battalion based in Saigon. And the recording is called Ghost Tip Number 10. And this 4-minute sound recording was, it just really struck me as a sound work in its own right. And perhaps it might be strange to discuss the success of a psychological operation, but at the same time, I find it really interesting because it is very powerful in conveying the imminent threat. With Ghost Tip Number 10, PSYOPs weaponized spirituality as part of the US warfare machine. Psychological operations' entire objective was to induce and reinforce behavior favorable to US strategic targets. The tactic was to tap into deep Vietnamese spiritual beliefs and to decrease the enemy's morale by using these beliefs against themselves. And the goal was to make the Vietnamese soldiers simply give up the war. A tape was recorded using Vietnamese actors to compose a 4-minute sound piece that would confront the Viet Cong of the anxiously wandering souls once killed in war. The spiritual anchor for the tape lies in the Vietnamese tradition that dead relatives should be buried close to their ancestors, as it is believed that their souls would otherwise never be left in peace, but wander the earth restlessly in a kind of eternal terrestrial hell. Ghost Tip Number 10 works insofar as it makes us conscious of our own mortality. It reminds us of a fundamental, basic question of whether death in war made sense. Ghost Tip Number 10 consists of 4 sound sections. Vietnamese funeral music is played within the first 20 seconds of the audio recording, setting the scene for what is to follow. We then hear the haunting voice of a man from afar, weaved into distorted sounds of wind and rustling. Then a voice of a child calling for his father appears, and after that a confused man who is in the process of realizing that he's dead says the following in Vietnamese, which I have translated, and I'm just going to read to you. Who's that? Who's calling me? My daughter, my wife. Your father is back home with you, my daughter. Your husband is back home with you, my wife. But my body is gone. I am dead. My family. Tragic. How tragic. My friends. I come back to let you know that I am dead. I am dead. I'm in hell. Just hell. It was a senseless death. How senseless. How senseless. But when I realized the truth, it was too late. Too late. Friends, where you're still alive, there's still a chance that you can be reunited with your loved ones. Do you hear what I say? Go home, friends. Hurry. If not, you will end up like me. Go home, my friends, before it is too late. Go home, friends. So these are the actors that we're recording tape, and this is an image of a helicopter with speakers attached to the outside of the helicopter, and that helicopter would fly through the jungle at night and broadcast ghost tip number 10 in the same way that the soldiers did that. I think I want to play a bit of ghost tip number 10, the original recording, to you, while after that either finishing my presentation or showing you how I have worked that research into other exhibitions. But maybe we can discuss that together, whether you want that or whether you rather start diving into the discussion immediately. Okay. I'm just gonna jump. Sorry.
Vợ tôi kêu tôi đang về. Bà đang về với con đâu. Tôi đã về với mình đây. Nhưng tôi còn đâu mảnh hình hài nữa. Tôi đã chết rồi má con bây ở. Tôi thảm thôi. Thảm không biết chừng nào. Các bạn của tôi ơi, tôi trở về để nói cho các bạn biết rằng tôi đã chết. Địa ngục, cái chết thật là oan uổng, thật là vô nghĩa, thật là nhưng lúc tôi biết thì đã quá muộn rồi. Các bạn ơi, các bạn còn sống, còn trong ngày các bạn gặp được người thân yêu của các bạn không nên đừng nói trở về các bạn, muốn mau đi, dứt khoát mau đi, lìa bỏ các bạn. Nếu không thì không thể tránh được cái chết cảm thương như tôi. Trở về đi các bạn ơi, nếu không thì quá muộn rồi, quá trễ rồi. Trở về đi, về đi các bạn ơi, về đi.
Flint or anybody else. I can either continue with showing it, or we can dive straight into the discussion as you prefer.
Speaking for myself and at least one person in the chat, we want you to, yeah, please continue. Everybody wants you to continue.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Let's rip.
Okay, right. So essentially, yeah, so that research started, I guess, in 2016, but then culminated in an exhibition in Vietnam, my first solo show in Vietnam, titled Remote Viewing at NASA and Collective. And this is how the exhibition looked like in the end. I essentially went to the various sites where Ghost Dinner number 10 was once broadcasted to the landscape, and filmed there and spoke to locals who live there, you know, kind of in search for a ghost. I was kind of like looking whether I could find ghost number 10, and whether there are locals that have heard of ghost number 10. And that then resulted in a video work that I can also show you in a little bit. But essentially how the exhibition is constructed is that there's sort of like this metal grid enclosing within which the video work is shown. The grid is sort of taken from temples, but also gates that divide, you know, in Vietnam, public and private spaces. But it's for me, it was much more about creating sort of an enclosing where you could watch the video and be more attentive to maybe your senses rather than your cerebral rational mind. And once you walked out of the video, the sound was displayed on, this is the video, and the sound was displayed on plinths with mirrors just around, you know, the sides, to sort of, for the viewer to sort of see their feet without seeing their head. But you had basically a 4-channel sound installation that is split from the video work, but then synchronized with the video work. But I really wanted, you know, the sound and video to be almost like a split body that, you know, that is within the exhibition itself. And on the walls, you have newspaper articles that I conceived together with an American journalist, Vincent Bevins. I think he's also here in this presentation. He also wrote this amazing book recently, The Jakarta Method, maybe you've heard. But anyway, I mean, I wanted to work with an American journalist, and Vincent was just in Vietnam at the time when I was there, and actually in Hanoi, so we actually met at the show. But I wanted to work with an American journalist also because I wanted to say that my view is not one that is really from within Vietnam, but that I have, you know, I'm Vietnamese, but also I grew up in Germany, and I really wanted to emphasize that the research that I've conducted was mostly through English literature, and, you know, that my own views are biased as well. I mean, on the other side, I also did research in Vietnam about Ghost number 10, but that view is biased as well, because in Vietnam, you know, there's heavy censorship, and anything related to the war, you know, is highly colored and tainted. So one other thing that happened as well is that we actually had to self-censor the articles, my articles, about the research relating to Ghost number 10, because we otherwise would have, you know, gotten closed. So because yeah, every time there's an opening at Nha San, a government official is there, and we knew that we couldn't talk about the war, and we couldn't especially talk about a psychological operation that happened. So we had to actually self-censor the text. which was horrible, but also, you know, there's a much bigger institution behind this, you know, artist-run space that exists since 20 years, and I didn't want them, you know, that I didn't want that they had to close the entire institution just because I didn't want to get censored. So, you know, there's this very complicated relationship. Of course, like to any English speaker, they could actually access the writing straightforwardly without censorship. But anyway, the writing itself is derived from my research. So this article that you see here, Troops Employ Fantastic New Tools in Nam, is based on real research. All of the information is based on research, real research, but at the same time, it also tries to mimic a journalistic voice that perhaps could have written this article in 1969. So we dated actually the newspaper back to 1969, trying to imagine what would have happened if somebody had published this at the time. And then, so this is the writing. And then the two other articles deal with the areas where I went to shoot the film, but also, you know, I spoke with the locals there. And this article specifically deals with the Mekong Delta and a coconut farmer that I encountered there. And the article deals more with the comparison between the lives his family had before the war and after the war. And interestingly enough, we found out that actually, although the coconut industry has been worldwide growing, considering the inflation, he's not earning much more than he has before. And his, you know, life situation and social situation hasn't actually changed much. Whereas within the cities, yeah, you know, Vietnam is like a really growing economy. And the final article here deals with the Black Virgin Mountain. The mountain was heavily fought for, you know, during the war, and they also played the ghost tape there. But on top of the mountain, what is so special about this is that there are sort of like two different spiritual narratives that sort of haunt this mountain. On the one that it's ghost tape number 10, and on the other it's the Black Virgin that died because she was in love with a Chinese soldier, and she kind of killed herself because it was an unfulfilling love. And now, you know, within contemporary Vietnam, people still go there to pray for her and to pray, you know, for their own love or for, you know, for having children and so forth. And last but not least, the video work. Before I show you a short clip, I just want to say that another thing I did for the video work was also to interweave my own family story and how my own family uses superstition to manipulate me. That happens, I think, a lot within Asian families, where the parent tries to tell the child that, you know, they should get married, they should get a stable job. I mean, my family doesn't understand why I'm an artist and how I make my income. And so instead of saying that directly in my face, they have to do that via a medium. So every time I come to Vietnam, my auntie becomes a medium through which I can talk to other gods, but also my dead grandmother. And through her voice, the voice of my dead grandmother, they tell me what I should do with my life. But they would never otherwise do it directly, because, you know, it wouldn't have the same power and the same, you know, I don't know, I guess, meaning and impact. That's at least what they believe. Okay, I'm going to show you a 5-minute clip, and then probably we should enter the discussion. I just wanted to conclude with a scene where my auntie, as the medium, who's pixelated because she's actually my dead grandmother, is sort of how you say, not worshipping, but she is trying to make this wallet become sacred or holy, just to keep the money there and to not lose it. And so just this intertwinement between spirituality and finance and money is something that is still happening. Okay, I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open this up. Flint, is that okay?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Thanks, Sung. Thanks for staying up so late and also that being so generous. Okay, so I obviously have, I'm gonna try not to take up any more space. If there's questions, now's the time to talk to Sung, ask Sung questions. There's one probably quick one from Ron. Can we get a bibliography? They ask. Don't know.
For me?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Right now? No. I'll send it to you.
Send it to me. I can pass it on.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we have an anonymous attendee who asked, wow, thank you so much. For a long time, I haven't known where to begin with actively researching the Vietnamese-American War, especially within an ambivalent and confused, especially within an ambivalent and confused, given the barriers you confronted in conducting research about the war, mostly available sources being in English, coming from non-Vietnamese lens. Do you have tips on how to vet your sources? Do you have any texts off the top of your head that you would recommend? I'm also going to throw this in the chat if you want to read it.
Oh, I mean, there's too much.
There's a lot there.
Yeah, I think
bigger question.
Yeah, I think like the what you're saying about the various perspectives that one can take. When I conducted research in Vietnam during the war, it was just equally tainted, and I think there's just not really a right way, I think, to portray that war, and I think it's really difficult. But what I did for my own work was to really specifically analyze certain aspects of that war, and I think it somehow helped me or made it easier for me to connect that to other things that I was interested in, to not lose myself in the grand narrative of things. So the only thing I think that I can recommend is sort of to maybe focus on the details and then grow from there. I'm not sure that is helpful, but yeah, it's extremely difficult to do research about that. I mean, even in Vietnam, even I also went to the demilitarized zone in 2016 and just tried to talk to locals about the war. And even that is very difficult. So what I did is I just traveled there. I mean, I talked to my family about that, but even with my family, that's difficult too, because they consider like my position as, their child, and they want to protect me from certain information that they want me to know because it's too dangerous or too weird or so forth. So I just thought, okay, I'm going to go to Hue and do field research. But when I did that, the word went around very quickly, and I think after the second day, I was introduced to the mayor, and I thought, great, I'm meeting the mayor. This is fantastic. I can, ask the mayor certain questions. But what actually happened was that the mayor would take me to certain people, and he would influence or watch what they would say, and he would actually control their responses so that I couldn't actually conduct the research that I wanted to do. And it took me another week to realize that.
Right.
And then I ended it because it just didn't make any sense. So yeah, I'm not sure I have a very good suggestion there, but yeah.
Okay, thanks, Sung. Rowan asked, could you talk about the process of finding or acquiring the recordings and if you manipulated or edited the recording for the exhibition?
Yes, I did. So a lot of the recording that you hear in Gods and Masters are field recordings. So on the one hand, there's a small section of Ghost in 10 that you can hear, but most of the recording is field recordings from the sites where the ghost tape was broadcasted to the landscape, because that was, sort of my main intention, to also invert the images, to invoke something else than, the real scene image. But then we also manipulated a lot of the sounds electronically. Again, with that idea of trying to invoke something that is not really provable or not really there, not really existent. So yeah, but that's, how I generally work. I take a lot of field recordings, and then I have elements that sometimes I also use actually sound archives, depending on whether it makes sense or not. But yeah, and then I also compose sounds. I mean, there are various ways, but for No Ghosts and Masters, it's mostly field recordings.
Great. Okay, Jackie, I want to thank you for sharing your knowledge. As a Vietnamese American, I really admire to see the familiarity in your work or talking about our heritage. I wanted to know when you moved to Germany and when you decided to pursue your art career.
Okay. I moved to Germany involuntarily when I was 5. My mother and I emigrated to Germany in 1992 to Freital, which is a small town outside of Dresden, the former East Germany. And my dad came to Germany the year I was born as a contract worker. So he was, through the Soviet Union connection, he was recruited as a contract worker. And yes, that's how I came to Germany. What was the second part of the question? Oh, when I started to make art. Yeah. So I actually studied politics before I studied art. I studied politics and administration, and then I studied international relations, and I didn't like it enough, at least to make a career, or I just felt like the job prospects weren't for me. And then I pursued, a degree in fine art at the University of Arts in Hamburg. And I was actually quite a bad student. I just didn't know what to do within my BA. I was just mostly, I had like this Bahn card 100, which is like this free Bahn. You had to pay for it, but once you had it, you had like this free ticket where you can just travel through Germany. And I used that to look at exhibitions because I didn't really know what to do. But I think when I graduated, I still wasn't sure whether I was an artist or what I was supposed to do. And then I did a part-time job in fashion, and that was terrible. So I went back to art because I was like, okay, I at least have a degree in something, and I might as well try to become an artist. And so I just tried to close the door and spend time in my studio, which I haven't done during my bachelor degrees. And then I did a postgraduate degree at the Royal Academy, which was very different, good in many ways. And yeah, that brought me to London. And and here I am today.
Thanks, Sung. Okay, Nick has a question. Thank you for your talk. Always a pleasure to hear from you. Since you spoke so much about the content of your work, I think it would be interesting to hear some more about your formal references. I'm excited about this too. What other artists influence your thinking, or how do you think about sculpture, film, sound, etc.? Which then poses the question, what is the relation between form and content in your work? Haha.
Ooh, yeah, that's a difficult one. Well, I studied sculpture with Andreas Luminski. Maybe you know a German artist who does a very weird but a really interesting sculpture, I think. But what he taught me was actually to think about space in different ways. So, for example, he really emphasizes how a viewer comes into a room, what they might encounter first, what they might encounter second, how they might move throughout the space, what they would hear first, what they would hear after, and how they would experience an exhibition as a site. So I think that has hugely influenced the way I perceive my exhibitions. I really think about it as a site with various elements, and within other exhibitions, more than even this one, I really try and layer the exhibition. So it's layered with various elements and contents. And for me, it's not so much about the viewer having to consume all the content, but more about providing different access points to the work. And you can sort of use that to dive deeper into it, but also refuse and leave, and that's fine as well. But somehow that's the way I conceive also my sound installations. They are a lot of times multi-channel without you seeing the sound source, and that's specifically also inspired by this image of the soldier with a backpack somehow, standing in the jungle. And form versus content, that's a difficult one, because I think about both in equal amounts. I think for me, it's really not about just revealing my research in a straightforward way. It's, for me, really about the translation of that research into artistic forms and into exhibition making. But the references are hugely diverse. I mean, I look at a lot of sculpture, I look at a lot of architecture. I mean, for example, What is Your X, is inspired by sort of like an internal room of a bank vault. But then, of course, when I start working on an exhibition, I draw on various things. The main intention for What Is Your X was to really build a tomboy room, a room that isn't real. Whereas before that, for example, in exhibitions such as Loveless that I exhibited at Pape Keys, or even Zugzwang at Haus der Kunst, I was playing much more with real objects, with ready-mades, with found objects, with actually, things that you can put in your room and they have a function. Whereas these doors and the bank vaults are essentially images in the end, or sculptural imagery that don't have a function at all outside of the realm of art. I hope this answers the question a little bit.
Yeah, that's really good. Can I follow up really quickly here? And maybe you could can I ask about all the smooth surfaces and and maybe what's your relationship to Judd?
Oh yeah, huge.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about, could you just talk about Judd for a second? And,
yes, well, I have
right angles or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, I have a very critical perspective on Judd, but also on minimalism altogether. Not because, I from my perspective of infliction, because my work is heavily influenced by conceptual and minimalist art. But I just brought out a book called Oath Against Minimalism, which is my first catalog, because let me show you something then. If we're already talking about it, then I really want to show you something.
Let's go.
Share. So for the exhibition in Cold Print, I was actually dealing with questions around minimalism in a specific way. So what I found during this research, which is based on the Havana syndrome, maybe you might have heard, which is this supposed sonic attack that happened in 2016 and 17 against US embassy staff based in Havana. But what I want to get to is actually another side of that research. So, the exhibition sort of links the Havana syndrome, a sonic attack that supposedly the US accused Cuba of having done against, their embassy staff. And it compares in a second stage that to PSYOPs and, the sonic weapon, obviously the Americans did against the Vietnamese during the Vietnamese-American War. And here I'm already talking about PSYOPs rebranding to MISO and how, PSYOPs essentially rebranded into military information support operations. And during that research, I found out that in this new screen, that the Army Corps of Engineers that built the helicopter landing mats, which you see on the right-hand bottom, which produced the helicopter landing mats for the Vietnamese-American War, that those helicopter landing mats were repurposed to build large sections of the US-Mexico border wall. And, so essentially this rectangle, metal plates that, used to be horizontal on the ground for heavy vehicles to land on, were then put vertical to build the border wall. And then I found this really amazing essay by Victoria Hattem, who spoke about the visual affinities between these helicopter landing mats and, for example, wall drawings by Solowit, and how she, within the essay, she argues how American imperialism has not only traveled through wars, but also through sort of a cultural imperialism that has been implemented through, for example, minimalism. So on the left screen, I'm sort of comparing, visually the US-Mexico border wall to a Solowit drawing. And here in the second one on the left, I'm comparing it to an Agnes Martin drawing, because also Solowit always builds up his wall drawings on a site-specific wall, and it's always a grid that is, built up. And and indirectly that has also influenced the way I think about Judge, and I think about that form of, cultural imperialism that has traveled through it. And I made these, these are the brain scans, but I made clothing items, military clothing items. So they are all sort of, original military cuts, but I changed the fabric to look like or feel more, to have these like grid patterns that are reoccurring to address that relationship between military intervention and maybe a more cultural intervention that has traveled, throughout art history, and how that, obviously that American art history has greatly influenced the global art history. I hope this was that's
amazing. Well, we have a bunch of questions, and I don't know. I kind of feel I don't want to overwhelm you, and we can obviously we'll copy the chat and send it to you so that you have these forever. But maybe we can just add. Are you cool with like one more? Mm-hmm. Okay. So Happy asks, I have a question for the writings of. What is your /x/? Do you personally undergo those feelings? And then like a follow-up one is maybe like, are like systems of knowledge carceral states? Are all of them?
Yes, I think, well, I on purposely call them scenarios instead of, at the beginning, obviously I thought I would call them sort of personality types, just because that was sort of the Jungian research I was doing. But I purposely called them scenarios because I felt that you can encounter multiple of these psychological states in oneself. And a lot of the writing is obviously inspired by friends, by families, by things I have observed and lived through. And so I think, I think that's probably always most maybe informative is what you can feel yourself and what you know and what you can write about. So they are sort of, definitely informed by what I have felt and experienced. Carceral systems and whether all knowledge is based on that, I hope not. And I don't think so. And the example I would like to point out is poetry, because hopefully
Oh,
poetry can do something completely else and create a space that is far away from that.
amazing. Let's end it there. Fuck it. Thanks, Sung. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks again for staying up. Really,
No,
yeah, it's really great. Okay, everybody's thanking you in the chat. Okay, just join us next week for soil, and then also here's the link at 2:30 for Maria if you want to join us. And yeah, see you next time. Bye, everybody.
see you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Do we stay? Can we just stay?